When I stepped into the courtroom that morning, my daughter Dawn rolled her eyes and whispered something dismissive to her husband Dave. But then something extraordinary unfolded. The judge looked up, froze, and murmured in disbelief, "It's her." A hush fell over the entire courtroom. Until that moment, no one had grasped who I truly was. That trial shifted everything. My name is Maeve. I'm 69 years old, and until a few months back, I was just your average grandma. Each morning, I'd rise at 6, brew my coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for 2 decades, and glance out the window of my small kitchen while watering the African violets my late husband adored. It was a straightforward, predictable life, filled with little rituals that brought me peace. For 45 years, I had been the mother who sacrificed everything for my only daughter, Dawn. I worked night shifts cleaning offices, sold homemade cupcakes on weekends, and sewed clothes to earn a little extra cash, all so she could attend college and live the life I never had. When she married Dave, a man who never offered me a kind word, I swallowed my pride and welcomed them into my home every Sunday, setting the table and putting on my best smile. I thought that after my husband passed away, Dawn and I would grow closer. How naive I was. Instead of finding comfort in our shared memories, my daughter began to view me as a burden. Her visits became obligatory and cold, her calls less frequent, and her excuses for avoiding me increasingly creative. The most humiliating moment of my life occurred on a dreary Thursday in October. I had prepared the chicken and dumplings she loved, the kind that took me hours but always brought a smile to her face as a child. I laid out my best tablecloth, the one I had embroidered when she was a teenager, and even bought fresh flowers for the centerpiece. When they arrived, Dave walked into my home as if he owned it, sank into my late husband's armchair, and turned on the television without so much as a greeting. Dawn wore a green dress I had gifted her, yet her expression was as frigid as January ice. "Mom, we need to talk," she said in that tone she had adopted since marrying, a voice that felt foreign to me. She perched on the edge of her chair, looking as if she wanted to flee. "Dave and I have made a decision," she continued, while he lounged on the sofa, his eyes glued to the screen. "This house is too big for you. You can't maintain it alone anymore. We need a bigger place for when we have kids. We found the perfect retirement community for people your age." It felt as though the ground had collapsed beneath my feet. This was the house where Dawn took her first steps, where we celebrated every birthday, and where her father died holding my hand. Every corner held our most cherished memories. "But Dawn, this is our home. All our memories are here," I pleaded, my voice trembling, each word cracking as it escaped my lips. "Memories are in the heart, Mom, not on the walls," she replied with a chill that penetrated my bones. "Besides, the community has activities for people like you. You'll be better off there. You'll have company your own age." Dave grinned with satisfaction, surveying the rooms with his eyes as if already the owner. "It's for the best, Mrs. Maeve," he added with that insincere smile I loathed. "We'll handle all the paperwork. Don't worry about a thing." My heart shattered into a million pieces. My own daughter, the child for whom I had sacrificed my youth, health, and dreams, was ejecting me from my own home to hand it over to that despicable man. Tears threatened to spill, but I swallowed them back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "I need time to think," I murmured, clinging to the little dignity I had left. "There's not much to think about, Mom," Dawn replied, standing up. "It's already decided. They're coming to appraise the house next week." And with that, they left. They abandoned my chicken and dumplings, untouched, my flowers wilting, and my heart in pieces on the table where we once shared happy family moments. That night, sleep eluded me. I sat in the kitchen staring at the photographs on the wall. Dawn as a baby, Dawn on her first day of school, Dawn on graduation day. In every picture, I was there, holding her, hugging her, smiling with pride. How had it come to this? How had the girl who once told me I was her hero turned into someone who treated me like trash? The following days were a nightmare. Dave brought a real estate appraiser without warning, a man in a gray suit who walked through my house as if it were merely an object for sale. He took notes, measured rooms, and spoke about potential renovations as if I weren't even present. Dawn nodded along with every disparaging comment about my home. "The pipes are old," the appraiser remarked. And these kitchen tiles are dated. You'd have to change everything. Those tiles had been installed by my husband's hands when Dawn was just 10 years old. Each one represented hours of labor, love, and dreams for our future. But to them, they were simply obstacles to their new life. The humiliation reached its peak when Dawn returned with brochures for the retirement community. "Look, Mom, it has beautiful gardens and bingo on Tuesdays," she said in that phony tone she used when trying to persuade me. "Plus, there's a nurse on duty 24/7. You'll be safer." I had lived in this house for 30 years without any issues. I knew all my neighbors, I had my routines, my plants, my memories. But to Dawn, none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting me out of her way. Then came the day I least expected. They arrived with papers. Dave strutted in like he owned the place, followed by Dawn and a man who introduced himself as a lawyer. "Mrs. Maeve, we have all the documents prepared for the transfer of the property. We just need your signature." "Transfer?" I asked, confused. "I thought you were going to sell the house." Dawn avoided my gaze. "Well, Dave and I decided to keep it. It's better for the family to hold on to properties." That's when it hit me. They didn't just want me out. They wanted to claim ownership of the very house my husband and I had built with so much effort. It was a robbery disguised as concern. "I'm not signing anything," I declared, summoning all the strength I could muster. Dave abruptly stood up, his face morphing into one I had never seen before, revealing a hidden aggression he had always kept in check while my husband was alive. "Ma'am, you're no longer in a condition to make decisions. Dawn is your only heir, and she is acting in your best interest." "This is my house," I shouted, surprising myself with my own strength. "And I'm not leaving." "Mom, don't make this harder," Dawn murmured, finally showing some discomfort. "You know you can't keep living alone. Last week you forgot to turn off the gas stove." It was a lie. I had never forgotten to turn off the gas. But Dave smiled as if he had found the perfect excuse. "Come on, Dawn. Your mother isn't well. It's dangerous to leave her alone." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you don't sign voluntarily, we may have to explore other legal options, like a mental incapacity proceeding." I felt the walls closing in on me. My own daughter was willing to have me declared incompetent to steal my house. The man I had accepted as a son-in-law was threatening me in my own living room, and here I was, a 69-year-old woman, completely alone against them. "I need time," I muttered, defeated. "You have 1 week," Dave said coldly. "Then we'll do what we have to do." When they left, I collapsed into my husband's armchair and wept as I hadn't since his funeral. I cried for the daughter I had lost, for the home they were taking from me, for the life crumbling around me. I felt betrayed, humiliated, utterly defenseless. That night, for the first time in my life, I contemplated giving up. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps I was too old, too weak, too useless to fight. Maybe it was best to accept my fate and quietly disappear, just as they wanted. But then something within me refused to die. A small flame of dignity still flickered in my chest. I wouldn't let them trample over me without a fight, not after a lifetime of sacrifice and devotion. The next day, Dawn returned alone. For a moment, hope filled my heart. Maybe she had reconsidered. Perhaps she had come to seek my forgiveness. How wrong I was. "Mom, I came to help you pack," she said in that robotic tone she had adopted. "I brought boxes. We can start with your clothes." I stared at her, searching for any hint of the girl I had raised. But all I found was a stranger, cold and calculating. "Dawn, please reconsider. I'm your mother." "That's exactly why I'm doing this," she replied, avoiding eye contact. "Because I love you, and I want what's best for you." Love. This was love, stripping me of my home, my dignity, everything I had left. For the next few hours, Dawn began packing my belongings as if they were worthless. She carelessly shoved family photos into boxes, packed the books my husband had given me, and the dishes from my wedding china, along with the tablecloths I had embroidered through sleepless nights. "This dress is so old, Mom. I don't think you need it," she remarked, holding up my mourning dress, the one I wore to my husband's funeral. "Leave it," I pleaded. "Please, just leave it." But she had already tossed it into a donation bag. My pain didn't matter. My feelings didn't matter. I didn't matter. The final straw came when she discovered my jewelry box. Inside were my wedding ring, the earrings my husband had gifted me for our 20th anniversary, and a small gold chain that belonged to my mother. This jewelry will be safer in a safe deposit box, Dawn said, placing it in her purse. It could get lost or stolen at the community. Those are mine, I shouted, trying to grab the purse from her. Mom, you're getting very upset. This just confirms you can't take care of yourself, she retorted with that sickening calmness that chilled me to the bone. In that moment, I knew I had lost my daughter forever. The Dawn I knew had died, replaced by this heartless woman manipulated by Dave and blinded by greed. That night, when Dawn departed, taking my jewelry and my most treasured memories, I was left alone in my half-empty house. The bare walls reminded me of how little I had left, how easily they had dismantled a lifetime. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by open boxes and scattered memories, pondering how it had come to this, at what point I had become invisible, when I had ceased to matter. The following days were sheer hell. Dave arrived every morning, supervising the process as if I were incapable of packing my own things. He brought in strangers who measured, photographed, and appraised every corner of my house. They spoke about me as if I weren't present, like an old piece of furniture that needed to be removed. The lady will have to speed up the process, Dave told Dawn. The movers are coming on Monday. It was Friday. I had 3 days left in the home where I had lived for 30 years, where I raised my daughter, where I had loved and been loved. What if I don't finish packing? I asked quietly. Don't worry, Mom, Dawn replied, not looking up from her phone. The movers will take care of everything. Just take what's essential. What's essential? As if an entire lifetime could be reduced to just the essentials. That afternoon, after they left, I wandered through my house like a ghost. I touched the walls my husband had painted. I sat in every chair where we had shared family breakfasts. I opened every drawer that held little treasures from my past life. In my husband's desk drawer, I discovered old letters, paid bills, and documents I had never examined. Most were inconsequential, but one folder caught my eye. It bore my husband's initials and had a small lock on it. Curious and desperate to find a connection to better times, I searched for the key in all his usual spots. I finally located it inside an old book, marking a page about investments and properties. When I opened the folder, my world shifted forever. There were documents I didn't fully comprehend, but one immediately captured my attention. It was a will dated just 6 months before my husband's death, a document I had never seen before. My hands trembled as I read. My husband had been much more astute than I had imagined, and Dawn, my dear Dawn, had no idea what she was about to uncover. With shaking hands, I began to read the will that would change my life forever. My husband, who had always been reserved about finances, had been quietly investing every extra dime he earned for decades. He had bought small properties when prices were low, invested in company stocks that were now worth a fortune, and accumulated wealth I never could have fathomed in my wildest dreams. But that wasn't all. The will clearly stated that I was the sole heir to everything. Dawn would only receive a small sum if I died, but only if she had cared for me with love and respect during my final years. My husband had been wiser than I thought. He had seen something in Dave that I had refused to acknowledge. There was also a clause that took my breath away. My husband owned the entire building where Dawn and Dave lived. The apartment they believed they were paying for monthly was actually ours. All the tenants in the building were paying rent to us, and that rent had been automatically deposited into an account I knew nothing about. With trembling fingers, I searched through the papers until I found the bank statements. The amount was staggering. For 2 years since my husband's death, I had lived as a poor widow while a fortune accumulated in the bank. There were more surprises. My husband owned shares in the company where Dave worked, not just minor shares, but a significant stake that could practically influence company decisions. There were also investments in restaurants, small businesses, and even a large piece of land on the outskirts of the city now worth millions. I read and reread every document, every contract, every certificate. Everything was there, perfectly organized and legal. My husband had built a silent empire, and I was its empress without even realizing it. But what impacted me most was a personal letter I found at the end of the folder. It was in my husband's own handwriting, addressed to me. My dearest Maeve, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you, and you have found this treasure I kept for you. Forgive me for not telling you while I was alive, but I wanted it to be a surprise for your golden years. You always worked so hard. You always sacrificed so much for Dawn and me that I wanted to ensure you would never want for anything. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I continued reading. I must also confess something. I never completely trusted Dave. There's something about him that worries me. That's why I structured everything this way. If Dawn takes care of you and respects you as you deserve, she will have a comfortable life. But if she ever treats you badly or tries to take advantage of you, you have all the power to protect yourself. My husband had foreseen exactly what was happening. He had seen right through Dave from the beginning and had prepared my defense before he died. Use this power wisely, my love, not to hurt, but to protect yourself and to teach. Deep down, Dawn is a good person. She's just confused, but if you need to defend yourself, you now have the tools to do it. Signed, your husband who loves you for all eternity. I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by documents worth millions, crying for the wise man I had lost and for the daughter I was about to lose. But for the first time in months, these weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of gratitude, hope, and yes, also of quiet satisfaction. Dawn and Dave thought they were stripping me of everything. They had no idea that I owned the building where they lived, the shares of the company where he worked, and properties scattered throughout the city. They believed they were throwing me out of my house to take it for themselves, not realizing that this house was the least valuable thing I owned. That night, I couldn't sleep, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't due to sadness. It was because my mind was racing, planning, calculating. My husband had given me more than money. He had given me power, and now I had to decide how to wield it. Monday morning arrived with a light rain tapping against the windows. Dawn and Dave showed up early with the movers, expecting to find me packed and ready to leave. Instead, they found me sitting calmly in my favorite armchair, sipping tea as if it were just another day. "Mom, what are you doing? The movers are already here," Dawn said, impatience lacing her voice. "I'm not leaving anymore," I replied with a calmness that even surprised me. Dave stepped closer, wearing that threatening smile I had grown to despise. "Mrs. Maeve, we already discussed this. You don't have a choice." I looked him straight in the eyes for the first time in years. "You're right, Dave. I don't have a choice. But it turns out you don't either." Something in my tone must have alerted them because Dawn stepped closer, her expression turning worried. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I just discovered something very interesting about my financial situation," I said, taking another sip of tea. "But don't worry, you'll understand everything soon." Dave and Dawn exchanged glances, their expressions skeptical, but I was no longer the frightened woman from the week before. I had a plan, and most importantly, I had the power to execute it. "Mom, enough with the games," Dawn said, irritation creeping into her voice. "The movers are waiting, and they have other jobs after hours." "Then they can leave," I replied calmly, "because they're not moving a single thing here." Dave stood abruptly. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation. You no longer have a choice in this matter." "On the contrary, Dave, I think it's you who doesn't understand the situation." I slowly rose from my chair and walked to the desk where I had left some of the documents I had found. Not all of them, just a few that I needed for this conversation. "Did you know that your apartment, the one you've been living in for 3 years, has never been paid to the real owner?" Dawn frowned, confusion washing over her face. "What are you talking about? We pay it religiously every month." "Yes, but you pay it to a property management company that, in turn, deposits the money to me because I own the entire building." The silence that followed was deafening. Dave was the first to react, letting out a nervous laugh. "That's impossible. You live on a measly pension." "I lived on a pension because I chose to," I replied, relishing every moment of their confusion. My husband was far smarter than any of us had imagined. I showed them one of the property deeds. Dawn took it in trembling hands, reading it over and over. This can't be real, she murmured. It's as real as the fact that you were trying to throw me out of my own house to take it for yourselves. But now it turns out this house is the least valuable thing I own. Dave snatched the document from Dawn's hands, his face paling as he read. This has to be fake, a forged document. You can verify it whenever you like, I said with a smile I hadn't felt in months. In fact, I encourage you to do so. Dawn crumpled onto the sofa as if her legs had given out. Why didn't you ever tell us anything? Because I didn't know myself until 3 days ago. Your father kept this secret to protect me. What a visionary he was. Dave began pacing the room, clearly agitated. This changes everything, Dawn. If your mother really owns the building, it means she can evict you whenever she wants, along with all the other tenants who have been paying me on time for 2 years. I completed his sentence. You can't do that, Dawn said, her voice cracking. We're family. Family. The word escaped my mouth with more bitterness than I intended. Like when you wanted to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my house? Like when you packed my memories as if they were trash? Like when you took my grandmother's jewelry? Dawn began to cry, but these were no longer the manipulative tears she had learned to use. They were tears of genuine fear. Mom, please, we can fix this. It was all Dave's idea. Dawn, Dave yelled, furious that she was blaming him. It's true, she continued, ignoring him. He convinced me it was for your own good. And you believed him? I asked, feeling my heart break once more. Do you know your mother so little that you believed him over your own intuition? The movers, who had been waiting at the entrance, stepped closer, looking confused. Excuse me, are you taking the stuff or not? Because we have another job in an hour. No, I replied firmly. Nothing is being moved here. Dave advanced toward me, but this time his demeanor shifted. He was no longer threatening, he was almost pleading. Mrs. Maeve, we can come to an agreement. Dawn is pregnant. Are you really going to throw your grandchild out on the street? I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. Dawn was pregnant, and she hadn't told me. I was going to be a grandmother, and I found out as a piece of blackmail. Is it true? I asked Dawn. She nodded through her tears. I wanted to tell you differently. I wanted it to be a special surprise. Like the surprise of throwing me out of my house? I replied, even though I felt my resolve beginning to waver. But then I remembered my husband's words from his letter. Not to hurt, but to protect yourself and to teach. Dawn needed to learn, and her child deserved to grow up with different values than the ones Dave was instilling in her. The news of the pregnancy disarmed me momentarily, but then I recalled all the pain they had caused me. A baby didn't erase the humiliation, the contempt, or the months of suffering they had inflicted. Congratulations on the baby, Dawn, I said with a calmness that was difficult to maintain. But that doesn't change what you did to me. Mom, please, Dawn pleaded. Think about your grandchild. Do you really want them to grow up without knowing their grandma? Their grandma was here all along, I replied. You were the ones who decided to get rid of me. Dave attempted one last manipulation. Mrs. Maeve, if you truly have as much money as you claim, why don't you help us instead of punishing us? We could be a united family. I regarded him with the contempt he deserved. A united family? Like when you threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent? Like when you turned my daughter against me? I never. Quiet, Dave, I interrupted with an authority I didn't know I possessed. I've heard enough of your lies. The movers had left, leaving us alone in the tension that filled the house. Dawn cried silently. Dave paced like a caged animal, while I felt a strange calmness for the first time in months. Here's what's going to happen, I announced. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. During that time, I don't want to see you around here unless it's a real emergency. And after that? Dawn asked, her voice breaking. After that, we'll see if you've learned anything about respect and family. Dave exploded. This is emotional blackmail. You're using your money to manipulate us. Manipulation? The word made me laugh bitterly. Like when you used my supposed mental incompetence to manipulate me? Like when you used my mother's love to blackmail me? It's different, Dave murmured, but he didn't sound convincing even to himself anymore. You're right, I admitted. It is different because I actually have the power I'm using. Dawn rose slowly from the sofa. Is there anything we can do to make you change your mind? Yes, I replied without hesitation, but I don't think Dave is willing to do it. What is it? She asked, clinging to that flicker of hope. I want an apology, a real sincere apology for every humiliation you put me through. I want you to admit that you treated me like trash, and I want Dave to admit that this was all his idea. Dave's face flushed with anger. I'm never going to humiliate myself in front of you. Then get ready to move, I said simply. Dawn looked at him pleadingly. Dave, please, she's my mother. She's your mother-in-law. We can swallow our pride for our child. No, he shouted. I'm not going to bow down to this manipulative old woman. The insult hung in the air like a slap. Dawn's mouth fell open, finally seeing her husband without the blind love she'd had for him. Manipulative old woman, I repeated softly. Interesting. That's what you really think of me, Dave. No, Dawn murmured, but he had already lost control. Yes, that's what I think. A bitter old lady who can't stand to see her daughter happy. That's why she made up this whole story about the money. Made up? I walked to the desk and pulled out more documents. Did I also make up these bank statements? Did I make up these property deeds? Did I make up these stock certificates? I laid each document on the dining room table until the surface was covered with irrefutable proof of my wealth. Dawn stepped closer, examining the papers with trembling hands. Oh my God, Mom, this is real. Very real, I confirmed. And now you understand why your husband is so desperate to discredit me. Dave attempted one last gambit. Dawn, you can't believe your mother hid all this for years. She's a liar. No, Dawn suddenly shouted, surprising us all. Stop it, Dave. Just stop. She turned to me, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mom, forgive me. Forgive me for everything. You're right. I treated you like trash. I took your memories, your jewelry, your dignity, and the worst part is that I did it because he convinced me you were a burden. Dawn, don't listen to her, Dave tried, but she ignored him completely. He filled my head with lies about your mental health, about the dangers of you living alone. He made me feel guilty for leaving you here when all you wanted was to be in your home. The silence that followed was palpable. For the first time in years, Dawn had defended something she believed was right instead of blindly following her husband's orders. Dave looked at her with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. If you choose your mother over me, Dawn, this relationship is over. Dawn stood silent for a moment, processing the ultimatum. Then, to my amazement, she straightened up and looked him directly in the eyes. Then it's over, she said in a voice I had never heard from her before. Dave was paralyzed, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. For years, he had controlled her every decision, every thought, every move. And now, for the first time, she had told him no. You're not serious, he murmured, a nervous smile creeping onto his face. You're pregnant, Dawn. You can't raise a child alone. I won't be alone, Dawn replied, looking at me for the first time in months with something resembling love. I have my mother. But I wasn't ready to forgive so easily. The months of humiliation, the nights of crying, the feeling of having lost my only daughter, none of that simply vanished with a few words. Dawn, I said softly, I appreciate that you finally opened your eyes, but this doesn't fix everything that happened. Her face fell. Mom, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Dave, sensing he was losing control, shifted his approach. He suddenly knelt in front of me, wearing a look of repentance I knew was insincere. Mrs. Maeve, you're right. It was all my fault. I convinced Dawn that you couldn't take care of yourself. I pressured her into making difficult decisions. Please forgive me. I looked down at him, feeling a mix of satisfaction and disgust. It was pathetic to see him grovel after months of arrogance. You're asking for forgiveness now, Dave, when you discover that I'm not the poor, helpless old woman you thought I was? I was terribly wrong, he continued, that performance of his all too familiar. Let me make it up to you. We can be a happy family. A happy family? I repeated. Like when you threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent, that was a mistake. Like when you called me a manipulative old woman just 5 minutes ago? Dave swallowed hard, realizing that everything he said was being used against him. I was upset. I didn't know what I was saying. No, I said firmly. You knew exactly what you were saying. You showed your true face for the first time. I turned to Dawn, who was watching the scene with a look of shame and pain. And you, Dawn, for months you treated me like a nuisance. Do you think an apology erases all that? No, she admitted, her voice cracking. I know I can't erase what I did, but I can try to make things right. How? Dawn glanced at Dave, who was still kneeling on the floor, a pleading expression on his face. Then she looked back at me. By leaving him, she finally said, by leaving this man who convinced me to betray the only person who has ever loved me unconditionally. Dave stood up abruptly. You can't be serious. You're having my child. I am having my child, Dawn replied with a determination that filled me with pride, despite everything. I don't want them to grow up watching their father manipulate and mistreat their grandmother. Dawn, you're making the biggest mistake of your life, Dave threatened. The biggest mistake of my life was marrying you, she retorted. Dave glared at both of us with pure hatred. This isn't over. I'm going to fight for custody of my child. I'm going to prove that both of you are crazy. What money are you going to fight with? I asked calmly. Because tomorrow morning, I'm going to speak to your boss. Did you know I own enough shares in your company to influence personnel decisions? Dave's face drained of color. You wouldn't dare. After all you've done to me. Of course I would. That's an abuse of power, he muttered. Like when you abused my mother's love to manipulate me. Like when you abused Dawn's trust to turn her against me. Dave headed for the door, but paused before leaving. This doesn't end here, he said, venom lacing his voice. I'm going to destroy both of you. Go ahead and try, I replied, unfazed. But do it from somewhere else, because you have exactly 1 hour to gather your things and leave my building. 1 hour? You said we had 30 days. That was when Dawn was with you. Now that she's on her own, there's no reason for you to stay on my property. Dave slammed the door behind him, making the entire house tremble. Dawn and I were left alone for the first time in months, enveloped in a heavy silence and surrounded by documents that proved a reality still hard to grasp. Mom, Dawn murmured after a long pause, can you ever forgive me? I looked at her. This 30-year-old woman who had just realized she had been living a lie, who had betrayed her mother for a worthless man, who was now pregnant and alone. I don't know, Dawn, I replied honestly. You hurt me deeply. I know, she whispered, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you. Starting with what? I asked. Starting with giving you back your mother's jewelry, she said, pulling out the small bag she had taken days earlier. And by asking if I can stay here tonight, I have nowhere else to go. I glanced at the bag containing my mother's jewelry, then at my pregnant and alone daughter, and felt my heart soften just a bit. One night, I finally said, but tomorrow we start discussing how you're going to earn my trust back. Dawn nodded, tears of gratitude spilling down her cheeks. Thank you, Mom. I promise I'm going to make things right. But I knew that promises were easy to make and hard to keep. The real test would come in the days ahead. The next few days felt strange and tense. Dawn stayed in her old room, which I had kept exactly the same since her marriage. During the day, we moved through the house like two polite strangers, only discussing the essentials: breakfast, the weather, her morning sickness. But I was watching, observing every gesture, every word, every attempt Dawn made to regain my trust. What I saw gave me hope. For the first time in years, my daughter was doing things for herself without expecting someone else to solve them for her. She washed her dishes right after eating, kept her room spotless, and even began helping with chores around the house without my prompting. On the third day, while watering my violets by the window, Dawn approached with a cup of tea in her hands. Mom, can we talk? I nodded without turning to look at her. I was learning that silence held more power than 1,000 words. I've been thinking a lot these past few days, she began, sitting in the chair where Dave used to lounge like a king, about everything that happened, about what I did and said. I kept watering my plants, waiting. I've realized it wasn't just Dave who changed me. I allowed him to change me. I chose to believe him instead of trusting my own heart. I finally turned to look at her. She had deep circles under her eyes and looked thinner despite her pregnancy. It was clear she hadn't been sleeping well. And why do you think that happened? I asked. Dawn sighed deeply. Because it was easier to blame you than to face the fact that I had married the wrong man. That raw honesty took me by surprise. I had expected excuses, justifications, but not such a candid admission. When Dave started complaining that you visited too much, I knew deep down he was being unfair, but it was easier to think you were clingy than to accept he was selfish. She placed her hands on her belly, where the pregnancy was just beginning to show. When he started suggesting you move to a retirement community, I knew it was wrong, but he convinced me it was for your own good. I wanted to believe him because it meant I didn't have to confront the real problem. What was the real problem? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. That I had married a man who didn't respect my family, who didn't respect me, and who was never going to change. In the days that followed, Dawn began sharing stories that sent chills down my spine. How Dave had gradually isolated her from her friends, convincing her they were a bad influence. How he controlled every cent she spent, telling her women didn't know how to handle money. How he had convinced her to quit her job because real wives dedicated themselves to home. "And you never thought to talk to me about this?" I asked one afternoon. "Dave told me you wouldn't understand, that you were from another generation. He convinced me that if I told you our problems, you'd tell me to leave him, and he didn't want any outside interference in our marriage." Each revelation hurt more than the last. My daughter had been suffering in silence while I believed she was happy. And when she finally tried to reconnect with me, it was already too late, because Dave had programmed her to see me as the enemy. 2 weeks after Dave left, Dawn received a call that left her as pale as a ghost. "It's the building manager," she said, her voice trembling. "Dave is in the lobby. He says he has the right to come up because he's still my husband." "And what did you tell him?" "That I didn't want to see him, but he won't leave. He's yelling that he's going to call the police, that this is kidnapping." I rose from my chair, a calmness surprising even me. "Tell the manager to come down. I'm going to talk to him." "Mom, he's really upset. We don't know what he's capable of." "Exactly. That's why I have to go down there." When I reached the lobby, I found Dave in a rage, yelling at the poor building manager who was trembling behind his desk. "That crazy old lady has my wife kidnapped," Dave shouted. "I want you to call the police right now." "Good afternoon, Dave," I said in a serene voice. He turned to me, his eyes bloodshot, clearly intoxicated. "You give me back my wife right now." "Dawn is exactly where she wants to be," I replied. "And if you don't leave my property immediately, I'll be the one calling the police." "This isn't your property. You're a liar." I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer's number, putting it on speaker. "Attorney Victoria," I said when she answered. "It's Maeve. I have an upset man here who refuses to leave my building. Could you confirm that I am the legal owner?" "Of course, Mrs. Maeve," my lawyer's clear voice replied. "You are the sole owner of the building located at." Dave fell silent as he listened to the legal confirmation. The manager looked at him, a mix of fear and embarrassment flashing across his face as he finally understood the situation. "Anything else you need me to clarify, Dave?" I asked after hanging up. "This isn't over," he muttered, but he no longer sounded convincing. "You're right," I agreed, "because tomorrow I'll speak to your supervisor at the company, and the day after that to the bank that provided your car loan. Contacts are useful when you have enough money." Dave stormed out without another word, but I knew he'd be back. Men like him don't give up easily. 2 months later, the day of the trial arrived like a storm we had been anticipating. Dave had made good on his threat and sued us for parental alienation and financial manipulation, seeking full custody of the baby Dawn was carrying. That morning, as I dressed in my best black suit, Dawn entered my room with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I'm scared," she confessed. "What if the judge believes him? What if he takes my baby away?" I hugged her for the first time in months, feeling her body tremble against mine. "That's not going to happen," I assured her. "We have the truth on our side." When we arrived at the courthouse, Dave was already there with a lawyer who had clearly cost him more than he could afford. He glared at me with that familiar hatred, but this time, it didn't intimidate me. I had something he would never possess: the peace of mind that comes from knowing you're on the right side. Dawn and I took our seats. She wore a purple dress that highlighted her 5-month pregnancy, while I donned the earrings my husband had gifted me for our anniversary. We were prepared. Dave's lawyer began his argument, painting me as a vengeful woman who used her money to destroy a happy marriage. He spoke of manipulation, emotional blackmail, and a toxic mother-in-law who couldn't accept her daughter's independence. When it was our turn, my lawyer, Victoria, stood elegantly and began presenting evidence. Text messages where Dave insulted Dawn, recordings where he threatened to leave her if she didn't throw me out, testimonies from neighbors who had heard his yelling and abuse. But the pivotal moment came when the judge looked up and stared at me. "Mrs. Maeve Williams?" he asked, disbelief written across his face. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, confused by his reaction. The judge removed his glasses and studied me carefully. "Did you work at the family court 30 years ago?" My heart stopped. "Yes, Your Honor. I was a secretary for Judge Miller. You helped me when I was an intern. You taught me how to organize files. You brought me coffee when I worked late. You were always kind to me when everyone else treated me like I was invisible." The entire courtroom fell silent. Dawn looked at me in amazement. Dave turned pale, and I felt as if time had stopped. "Your Honor, I am Judge David Morales," the judge continued. "Do you remember me?" And then I saw it beneath the gray hair, the wrinkles, and authority. A shy young man who had worked in my office decades ago. The boy I had defended when other lawyers mocked him. The one I had encouraged when he doubted his abilities. "David," I murmured, tears welling in my eyes. "Of course I remember you." The judge smiled, and for a moment, he was that insecure young man again, seeking approval. "I never forgot your kindness, Mrs. Maeve. You told me one day I'd be a great judge, even when I didn't believe it." Dave and his lawyer exchanged panicked glances. They knew they had lost before the trial even began. "Your Honor," Dave's lawyer interjected, "I believe this constitutes a conflict of interest." "There is no conflict," Judge Morales replied firmly. "There is only justice. After reviewing all the evidence presented, it's clear that Mr. Dave Foster has been the only manipulator in this story." The verdict was resounding. Dave lost all rights to the baby and was prohibited from approaching Dawn and me. He also had to cover legal costs and a settlement for emotional damages. When we left the courthouse, Dawn hugged me as she hadn't since she was a child. "Mom, how is it possible that the judge knew you?" "Life goes in circles, honey," I replied, "and kindness always returns when you least expect it." 6 months later, when my granddaughter Serenity was born, I understood that everything had been worth it. Dawn had regained her essence. She had become the loving mother I always knew she could be. One afternoon, as we rocked the baby in the garden, Dawn asked me a question I had been waiting for. "Mom, have you really forgiven me?" I looked at her. This woman who had grown so much in such a short time, who had learned to value what truly mattered. "I forgive you, Dawn," I finally said. "But more importantly, you've learned to forgive yourself." That night, as I prepared tea in my old chipped mug, I reflected on my husband and his letter. I had used the power he left me just as he had hoped, not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. Dawn had learned that true love isn't based on control, but on respect, and I had learned that it's never too late to stand up for your dignity. Looking out the window at the garden where my granddaughter played, I smiled. Some battles are worth fighting, and some victories taste sweeter when they take a long time to arrive. In the end, I hadn't needed to yell to be heard. I only needed to remember who I truly was and defend it with the peace of mind of someone who knows they're on the right side of history. 5 years after the trial, my life had taken a turn I never could have imagined. Little Serenity, now a 4-year-old girl with her mother's lively eyes and my same stubbornness, chased butterflies in the garden while Dawn and I prepared Sunday lunch. "Grandma Maeve, look what I found," Serenity shouted, running toward me with a yellow flower in her small hands. "It's beautiful, my love," I said, lifting her to give her a kiss. "Should we put it in the vase with the others?" Dawn smiled at me from the kitchen. In these years, she had blossomed in extraordinary ways. She returned to school and now worked as an accountant at a small but thriving firm. Most importantly, she had regained that spontaneous laugh I remembered from her childhood. "Mom, a letter came for you," she said, handing me an elegant envelope. "It's from the foundation I established 2 years ago with part of my husband's inheritance. Home and Dignity had become a refuge for older women suffering from familial abuse or abandonment. What began as a means to honor my own experience had transformed into something much larger. "What does it say?" Dawn asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "They're inviting us to the inauguration of the third house," I replied, feeling that deep satisfaction that comes from knowing your pain served a greater purpose. "They'll house 15 more women." Over the years, we had helped more than 50 women rebuild their lives. Some arrived like I had, stripped of their dignity by ungrateful children or abusive relatives. Others came alone, without family, but with similar stories of abandonment and mistreatment. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Dawn went to answer it and returned with a mysterious smile. "Mom, you have a visitor." Behind her stood retired Judge David Morales, accompanied by an elegant woman with silver hair. "Mrs. Maeve," he greeted me with that warm smile he had kept since youth. "I want to introduce you to my wife, Elena." "It's an honor to meet you," Elena said, taking my hands. "David has told me so much about you. He says you were one of the most important people in his professional training." "He exaggerates," I replied, feeling deeply moved. "Not at all," David insisted. "That's why we wanted to invite you personally. The Retired Judges Association is going to give you an award for your work with the foundation." "That's not necessary," I started to say. "Yes, it is," he interrupted. "Your story inspired many of us to reflect on true justice, the kind that goes beyond written laws." After they left, Dawn and I sat on the porch while Serenity played with her dolls. The garden was more beautiful than ever. I had hired a gardener, but I still took care of the African violets my husband loved so much. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Mom?" Dawn asked suddenly. "What?" "That you never got bitter after everything I put you through. After all the pain, you never let it harden your heart." "Of course I got bitter," I admitted. "There were nights when resentment consumed me. But your father taught me something invaluable in his letter." "What did he teach you?" she asked. "That true power doesn't come from revenge, but from the ability to transform pain into something useful for others." Dawn nodded, understanding she had experienced that transformation herself. She now volunteered at the foundation, using her own experiences to guide young women who had fallen into toxic relationships. "Did you ever find out what happened to Dave?" she asked. "My lawyer, Victoria, told me he moved to another city. It seems he got married again." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I hope he learned something from all this, but honestly, it's no longer my concern." "You're not even curious?" "No," I replied honestly. "I learned that some people only come into your life to teach you lessons. Once you've learned the lesson, you can let them go." Serenity came running with rosy cheeks from playing. "Grandma, will you tell me the story of the brave grandma?" It was her favorite story, a child-friendly version of what had happened. In my tale, the grandma discovered she had magical powers and used them to protect her family from a big bad dragon. I pretended to complain, but I was already lifting her to sit on my lap. "Yes, and don't forget the part where the good judge helps her." As I recounted the story for the umpteenth time, I thought about how strange destiny can be. I had needed to lose everything to discover what I truly had. I had to hit rock bottom to find my real strength. "And happily ever after?" Serenity asked when I finished. "Happily ever after," I concluded. "The brave grandma found her happy ending." "You found your happy ending, Grandma," Serenity said. I looked around. Dawn was setting the table for dinner. The garden was in full bloom. My beautiful granddaughter was in my arms, and the letter from the foundation promised to help even more women. "Yes, my love," I replied. "I did." That night, after putting Serenity to bed, I sank into my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and the letters that arrived weekly from the women we had helped. An elderly woman, 75 years old, thanked me for giving her the courage to confront her abusive son. A 60-year-old woman shared how she had regained her house after her grandchildren tried to swindle her. Every letter confirmed that my experience had served a purpose larger than my own pain. Dawn sat next to me with her own cup of tea. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" "About your father," I admitted. "How proud he would be of what we've built." "I'm sure he's watching us," Dawn murmured. "And about you," I continued, "how proud I am of the woman you've become." "I learned from the best," she replied, taking my hand. We sat in silence, savoring the tranquility of the night. In the distance, the gentle noise of the city could be heard, but here, in our garden, peace reigned. I love you, Mom, Dawn whispered. And I love you, honey, I replied. I've always loved you, even in the darkest moments. And it was true. A mother's love transcends hurts, disappointments, and betrayals. It's stronger than pride, more enduring than resentment, and more powerful than any fortune. That night, I slept soundly, without nightmares, without worries. I had discovered something worth more than all the riches in the world, the peace of knowing I had used my second chance wisely. In the end, it wasn't about how much money I had or how much power I wielded. It was about transforming my pain into purpose, my humiliation into strength, and my experience into wisdom for others. I had learned the most crucial lesson of all. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to rewrite your story. Subscribe my channel. See you in the next video with love and respect.